Afghanistan was going through major political changes. A communist political party known as the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan had taken control of the government. This new government was closely aligned with the Soviet Union. However, many Afghans strongly opposed the new leadership. Religious leaders, tribal groups, and rural communities resisted the reforms introduced by the communist government. Soon, protests and armed resistance began spreading across the country. Afghanistan was slowly moving toward civil war. Part 2. The Soviet invasion. By late 1979, the Soviet Union feared losing influence in Afghanistan. The Cold War was already creating global tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. Afghanistan was seen as strategically important. So in December 1979, Soviet troops entered Afghanistan. Their goal was to stabilize the communist government and prevent the country from falling out of Soviet influence. What Moscow expected to be a quick intervention soon turned into a long and difficult war. This conflict became known as the Soviet-Afghan War. Part 3. Afghan Resistance. As Soviet troops entered the country, Afghan fighters began organizing resistance groups. These fighters became known as the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen used guerrilla tactics and relied heavily on their knowledge of Afghanistan's mountainous terrain. Instead of fighting large battles, they launched small, mobile attacks against Soviet forces. But the war was no longer just a local conflict. Soon, international powers began to get involved. Part 4. International support for the Mujahideen. The United States saw the Soviet invasion as an opportunity to weaken its Cold War rival. Through the Central Intelligence Agency, the US launched a covert program known as Operation Cyclone. This program provided weapons, training, and financial support to the Afghan resistance. The neighboring country Pakistan played a crucial role. Pakistan's intelligence agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence, helped organize and distribute support to different Mujahideen groups. At the same time, Saudi Arabia also provided significant financial assistance to the Afghan resistance. Together, these countries strengthened the Mujahideen forces fighting against the Soviet army. However, this international involvement would also have long-term consequences. Part 5. Foreign fighters arrive. During the 1980s, volunteers from many countries traveled to Afghanistan to join the fight. These fighters believed they were participating in a religious struggle against foreign occupation. Among them was a wealthy Saudi volunteer named Osama bin Laden. At the time, he was not widely known. But during the Afghan War, he helped build networks that connected fighters from different countries. These networks would later evolve into something much larger. Eventually, they would contribute to the creation of Al-Qaeda. Part 6. A war that drained the Soviet Union. The Soviet-Afghan War lasted nearly 10 years. The Soviet army faced constant resistance from Mujahideen fighters. The difficult terrain, long supply lines, and continuous guerrilla attacks made the war extremely costly. Over time, the conflict drained Soviet resources and damaged its global reputation. In 1989, the Soviet Union finally withdrew its troops from Afghanistan. But the war had already left deep scars. Millions of Afghans were displaced, cities were destroyed, and armed groups remained active across the country. Part 7. The long-term consequences. Although the Soviet withdrawal ended the direct conflict, the networks formed during the war continued to grow. Many fighters who gained experience in Afghanistan later joined militant movements around the world. Groups like Al-Qaeda emerged from these networks. And years later, these developments would lead to one of the most shocking events in modern history, the September 11th attacks. Ending. What began as a Cold War conflict in Afghanistan would eventually reshape global politics. The war drew in international powers, created new militant networks, and set the stage for conflicts that would last decades. But this was only the beginning of the story. Next episode teaser. In the next episode, we will explore how the networks formed during the Afghan War eventually led to the creation of Al-Qaeda and changed global security forever. Because the chain reaction of wars was just getting started.